The idea that to be chased, handcuffed, and then questioned is somehow supposed to make you feel like you're in good hands and we really are here for you, it doesn't compute.
After the New York Times published images from Figueroa Street, advocates asked, was legal consent enough to prevent harm? In this conversation, Sandie Morgan and journalist Nina Alvarez used that question as a starting point for a deeper conversation. Nina reflects on ethical duty of care, the lasting life of images, and why stories about trafficking require more than just good intentions. Her goal is not to hand down a checklist, but to invite journalists, advocates, and listeners into a more careful conversation. Hi, I'm Alicia. I'm a student here at Vanguard, and I help produce the show. Today, Sandie talks with Nina Alvarez, a journalist, documentarian, video photographer, and professor of international journalism at Columbia Journalism School. And now, here's their conversation.
Welcome to the Ending Human Trafficking podcast, Nina Alvarez.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
I have been following you now for a little while, and your work as a journalist, documentarian, video photographer, and you're also a professor of international journalism at the Columbia Journalism School. What does that part of your life look like? How do I get to take a class with you?
Well, you apply to Columbia Journalism School and voila, you get in and you can decide if you want to take a video course with me or covering immigration, which is what I'm currently teaching. And we have wonderful students coming in from all over the country as well as internationally, although that has suffered a bit of a setback in the last year. But it's a wonderful student body who are excited about journalism, even though we're going through a rough time with legacy media suffering major hits, taking major hits and shrinking in some places. But I see other opportunities coming up in independent journalism and community-based journalism. That's really important.
I just took a class on a study abroad in Greece, and we worked with a group called Humanitarian Bridges, downtown Athens in a refugee center, and then made trips to refugee camps remote 3 to 4 hours outside of Athens. And the stories, the understanding that my students received in person just can't be replicated in the classroom. So we keep working on these issues, and we have it right here in Orange County. So we want to fulfill our REACH model here at the Global Center, which is research, education, advocacy, collaboration to build hope. So locally all the way to a global impact. So I'm really very pleased to bring your voice to our podcast community. Thank you.
Thank you.
So let's dig right in, and I want to tell people, I want you to read the article that we're going to talk about. Nina wrote an amazing piece around the theme of ethical duty of care. And while the story that she reflects on is from Los Angeles, in a part of our community that is known for highly exploiting particularly young women, but also young men. Read the story, but we're going to talk beyond that. And I'm fairly certain that this podcast will end up in our anti-human trafficking certificate coursework, for sure in the ethics class. But talk about first, what do you mean by the ethical duty of care from a journalist's perspective?
The ethical duty of care is really focusing on what will be the impact on the individual that is participating in your story. First of all, do they understand that they are indeed participating in a story that is going to have the kind of reach that the New York Times has, and that it's a permanent story, that it is going to live online for a very, very, very long time, that it is not something that is erasable? And so, does the person understand what this means? And are they in the position to actually provide the consent? And consent is not necessarily a release form. That's just one piece of it, right? A release form is a document, but consent is a process. Consent happens before, during, and even after publication of the story. So this
Wait, I got to interrupt you because people know I've worked with survivors for 3 decades, and I have had survivors sobbing here at my table. I tried to get them to take this picture down. And it's this makes it sound like they're in a duty of care model. There is a way. I'm hopeful. No? Yes?
Well, it depends. I think that the current general practice is we don't take pictures down at the request of someone who says, "Hey, I don't like that picture." It's understandable from a journalism standards point of view that we are providing information that our subjects may or may not like, may or may not approve of. But there's a big difference between, a child who is on the streets of LA being trafficked and a politician who doesn't like being caught in the act or didn't like something he said and wants a retraction. Those are not on the same plane. And so when we think about, and this in fact did happen with the New York Times and that story, there were concerns voiced to the New York Times. They were communicated clearly in phone calls and emails, and subsequently in a letter that was signed by 22 organizations saying, these pictures, it's not even about the narrative anymore. It's really about the individual harm. And what can you say about how you obtained consent? And it was disappointing to learn that the process didn't even abide by journalistic standards. It didn't take into account the ability for the girls in those images to consent to being photographed while they were in police custody or being handcuffed. That's not an instance where they were providing consent. Now, were any laws broken? No, there were not. But the question is, does that make it okay? And because it's legal, does not make it ethically acceptable.
Okay, so let's dive in there a little bit. In your article, you do talk about some of the more nuanced aspects of consent. And can you expand on that a little bit, particularly when you're talking about someone that has experienced trauma?
Well, there are 2 instances, right? There are children. There are people who are under the legal age of consent. They, in California, for example, are not at the age of consent before age 18. So they can't consent to sex. They can't consent to pretty much anything without a parental a parent giving consent. And so this is true on so many levels, right? With medication, with permission to go on a school trip, to getting your photographs taken and published. That is just the baseline, right? On that end of things. Then there are adults who, in the case of this story, the main participant, the main, I'll say, character, for lack of a better word, was 19 years old at the time of publication. But she had been the victim of chronic sexual assault, rape, since she was 13. And there were pauses in there when she was spending, where she was actually in a home, but she returned to that for about a year before this article came out. So, yes, she was 19 years old, but, turning 18 doesn't mean you are suddenly okay and cleared of all the trauma that you have experienced. It means that you are legally allowed to give consent. But does it mean that we should rely on that as an understanding or as a reference to, well, she can legally give consent. We understand that at 19, most people understand, have a clear idea of what decisions they have to make, although that is also debatable at 19. But for someone who has undergone through so much trauma, who has survived the worst that can happen to a young person on a chronic basis, I have to question whether that person's ability to say yes is solid, right?
Well, and you mention in the article, which I'm going to say it again to listeners, go to the show notes and click on the link and read the article, because it's sort of like taking a class with Nina. I feel like she identifies clinical markers in the fields of social work and trauma psychology. And here at the Global Center for Women and Justice, we've done survivor scholarships. And one of the elements that we guarantee is we will never ask you to do an interview or take a picture in exchange for this scholarship. And if you are invited and want to accept an invitation from some organization or opportunity, we want to make sure that you have been signed off by your therapist. And sometimes that has not worked well. So how, as a journalist, do you monitor clinical markers?
Well, I'm not clear on what the clinical markers really are.
They're in quotes in the article. Yeah.
Yes, they are, because and I asked several health professionals who work with this population of sexually exploited youth, and was told repeatedly, there is no defined set of clinical markers. What we know is that there are factors that need to be considered when someone is thinking about participating in a media interview or sharing their story that will have a public distribution. And one is, you have to be out of the life, right? If you are still in it, it's very difficult for you to participate and safely, right? This is a risk. Those girls that were photographed in the New York Times story were identifiable. Maybe not to you, maybe not to me, but certainly to themselves, to each other, and to their traffickers. And so that's number one. safety. Number two is certainly dealing with their own safety in terms of not risking re-traumatizing or adding to the trauma. It's not even traumatizing again, because I think you really don't get over that kind of trauma. It's a life's work. And this has been told to me repeatedly by survivors who've said, I have been working on this for decades. It will still be something I will continue to work on for a long time to come. So we are assuming that because someone is out of the life, or in quotes, rescued, that they are no longer in danger, and therefore they are free agents. But if you're relying on an organization, and I'm glad to hear about your policy, because that is the model that we should be thinking about as journalists. Are they relying on someone? If an organization is organizing or coordinating some access to someone, a survivor, that is a question we need to ask. How much does this person rely on this organization? Are they saying yes because it's easier to say yes? Can they freely say no? Same thing if they are in police custody. Are they free to say no?
So you brought up the word rescue, and my listeners know it is not one of my favorite words. Can you talk about how that entered your story?
I understand, even from the time when I was filming Very Young Girls in 2007, that it was not a one-time event, that it was always going to have to be a process for all of these kids. So, and they did not actually ever have a positive interaction with police at that time. And so the idea that to be chased, handcuffed, and then questioned is somehow supposed to make you feel like you're in good hands and we really are here for you, it doesn't compute. And so, but it's a narrative that computes with audiences. It's a narrative that computes for Hollywood and for readers, but it's not something that actually computes if you're a kid who has been trafficked, is being trafficked. It doesn't make sense that these are the people that are going to rescue me.
I remember the first victim here in Orange County, who was a child maid in an upscale neighborhood. And when she was, quote unquote, rescued, she didn't talk. She didn't tell her story for almost 2 years. And when we're looking at trauma-informed care services, understanding, not feeling safe, and knowing that her traffickers had rehearsed, if the police come, don't say anything or you'll never see your family again. You'll go to jail for the rest of your, all kinds of things. And I think when we watch Hollywood and some movies, this idea of rescue as now you're out of it so you're safe is so false. And we start building almost, I feel like sometimes we're creating a fantasy world built around wonderful words like resiliency. And I think the reason I read your article so many times is I felt validated for my concerns. And here in California, in many of our task forces, we don't even use the word rescue. We use the word recover, and especially with adolescents who run, it's like we just know they're going to run. We have had young women, particularly, that have been quote unquote rescued, and then they run 15 times. So is it a rescue every time?
No, it's not. And by the story's own admission, the New York Times story's own admission, the majority run. And that's where I think but that's the narrative that really sells, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's not, and so it's heroic, it's dramatic, it's really like scenes out of a movie. And that does resonate. It excites readers. And, what doesn't seem that attractive, I would say this is not really about readers. It's about editorial decisions, that what's not attractive is the alternatives to that. A health-centered approach, a community-centered approach. What if we were to try something else that did not center the police? There's a lot of, as long as we keep putting these narratives out there, it's going to be really hard to sell the alternative. And there will be more funding available for the police-centered approach, the rescue approach, versus the recovery approach, in which survivors are given the resources, health resources, housing resources, all these other social services that would actually help them become independent and help them really leave and make a decision to leave.
So you mentioned an editor, and I'm curious, what kind of questions might an editor ask before approving a story that includes personal details, images, someone being exploited? How can an editor protect the integrity of a duty of care model?
I was very surprised to see it was not just the central character, but there were other girls whose names were mentioned, whose first names were used, who were minors, and whatever they said in interviews with police, that was used in the story. The story doesn't tell us exactly how those testimonials were obtained. And we don't know if the reporter was sitting in the room. If so, did that child know there's a reporter in the room? And whatever I say here is not just for police use. It's going to appear in the New York Times. And I don't think that they ever provided that kind of clarity, whether it was in the story or in their responses to concerned parties. And that's concerning that an editor didn't flag that. Like, hey, how do we know this? Should we not use their names or other identifying descriptions? Do we even need to use their first names? Can we just call them like a 15-year-old? Or why do we have to give them use their actual real first names? That did not make any sense to me. And I was concerned that an editor did not flag that.
Okay, so now we've looked at it from that perspective. Let's go to the other side of the equation, because it feels a little bit like the victim is between one viewpoint of we've got to tell this story and another viewpoint where care for them and their recovery process is the goal. So, for organizations that work with survivors, and honestly, Nina, there is a lot of pressure on nonprofits to tell a good story so they can raise money to do what they do. So, for those organizations, what should they be asking before agreeing to connect a journalist with someone in their program?
That is a real tension. It's going to be a real tension. And I think it's really important for us journalists to separate the drama from what the story needs to be, that needs to be told. I think in this case, what was important was the entry point. The perspective was largely from the perspective of law enforcement. It used their language, it used their grievances to frame the story. And I think that's another thing the editor should have flagged. And I think, the point of entry is going to shape what we see. If I'm on an embed in Iraq, I'm going to see that. If I'm on an embed in GEMS, I'm going to see that. But what I put out there, I've got to be able to separate that from what I'm putting out there. And what I would say to organizations is two things. One, definitely see what this journalist has done before. What is this publication? What has their treatment been on this or similar topics? I would not put someone who is not in a place of true independence in a position where they are engaging a reporter. I would also say it's important to set some ground rules. As the person who is contributing to your story, I want to see what you're going to write about me. And I need to see the pictures that you're planning to use. And I know this sounds odd coming from a journalist because I want total control. And I'm not asking for journalists to give up control. I'm asking journalists to have this is the ethical duty of care part. This is where we have to think about, how will this affect this person? How will this potentially change their lives, either make it more difficult? It usually doesn't make it a whole lot better. So you've got to be able to, you can't promise this is going to be amazing and you're going to be famous and you're going to be a superstar.
Yeah.
What you can say is, I will run this by you. I will read the passages that describe you, and just let me know if I got anything wrong.
So is there a way in a journalist's commitment to telling the story to factor in some kind of shared power, shared authority? Here's what I'm thinking. I have grandkids. They are on social media and they care about what pictures I post. So we have a deal. They look at my phone after I take pictures, and if I can post it, they heart the picture. If it doesn't have a heart, I don't post it. How do we do that kind of personal integrity, autonomy in a world where pictures are like content is king?
Oh yeah, that is so key. The images, people remember images, right? And so there's power in that. And I think it's really, really got to be, and that is not a journalism term, sharing power or sharing
Ah,
anything at all, really. It's more like, give me your information. I'm going to take this information and put it out there the way that I process it. But,
mm,
there are journalists out there who are really setting a standard that I think is exemplary. And in some cases, I was really wowed by the extent that they would go to ensure that a survivor who participated in a story felt seen, heard, and safe. And
mm,
in one instance, one journalist told me she actually traveled to another state to sit with the survivor and to review, like, here's what I'm going to say, and here are the images. And because she wanted to see her in person, to have this
mm.
conversation. And I know that not every organization is going to have those kinds of resources, but I
Yeah.
think that that demonstrated a willingness to really take into account how that person's feeling pretty vulnerable. I know that as soon as we end this interview, I'm going to go like, oh my God, what did I say? Can I take it
Mm,
back? Can I look at it? And, but in my world, that's it. It's over. But it doesn't have to be that for
mm.
survivors who share their stories. We can do better. We can actually engage them and say, hey, this is what we're putting out there. Am I getting it right?
So, as a journalist, when the source, and see, you've developed rapport and they're talking to you face to face, like you and I are doing right now. And I will tell you things that if I was standing in front of 500 people, I would not say. But this is going to be broadcast and there will be 500 people. So, how do you help a source that's kind of a commodification of a real person, but that is willing to share details with you that may not be in their own best interest long term? Do you say, oh no, don't tell me that?
Because you tell me doesn't mean I have to use it. And I think as a
Mm,
journalist, I have to discern, is this going to be okay for this person? If this were my daughter, would
mm,
would I be okay like putting this out there? Is ultimately it is about letting that person have some say in how they're being portrayed. And I think that we do need to do better in terms of engaging this consent, not as it's legal. It is,
mm,
do you get where this is going? Do you understand that this is going to be out there and that it's not going to come down? And so we need to, it's a process. And so, and I'm pretty sure that the people who were photographed on Figueroa, I doubt that those were followed up on, right? I
mm,
doubt that there was a conversation like, hey, I took a picture of you being handcuffed. Is it okay if I use this picture? Is that,
mm.
you know, your tattoo? Yeah, it looks like your tattoo. Oh, it looks like you could be identifiable. Is it okay if I use this picture? Are you feeling like it's not going to be harmful to you?
Well, and the permanency of images and words. I think that's a piece of consent that is not really something that someone who's been living literally hand to mouth, maybe, can even begin to conceptualize. This is going to be here. Yes, I'm getting out. yes, I'm going to school. Yes, I'm going to have a future. And then I'm going to be at an event and maybe teaching a class or not even related to human trafficking. And somebody says, "Oh, I saw your picture when you were 14 years old." The permanency of that. How do we communicate that when we're asking someone to tell us the details of their story?
This is, I mean, my daughter Googled me 2 weeks ago. She's 10. And for a school
Oh,
project, everybody Googled their parents.
oh my goodness.
And it struck me as like, well, yeah, of course she found me. But, that's like anybody can find you. And, it doesn't bother me because in my position, well, yeah, we're going to have a website and that's not hard. But, but I think it's not really set in, I don't think anyone's really internalizing like, oh, wow, they think social media is fleeting. It's like here today, gone tomorrow, on to the next thing. But if you're actually looking for something, or maybe you're not, and somebody else resurrects these images and boom, they just flash across your employer's screen or a coworker or your own kids later or your parents or people who didn't know this part of your story and you don't necessarily want them to, then it's there. And I think this is what we did not see coming when we did Very Young Girls, right? That was 2007. No one was thinking, we were thinking film festivals and broadcast, and it'll be limited because it's only on Showtime, but it's not. And this is what has come back to me, is hearing about how the kids in the story who are now grown women feel like they can never escape that. And that's hard to hear. That's hard to hear that what you thought was an empowering experience. And I have no doubt that the reporter of the New York Times story believes that it was an empowering experience. And I believe that the 19-year-old young woman maybe believes that this is empowering. I should be able to tell my story. But I think later, downstream, that's when the impact can be felt in a different way.
And one of the challenges for me is that attention economy. We want people to see this. And if I've heard it 100 times, I've heard it 100,000 times. But it's good for building awareness. But survivors often explain to me it's the wrong awareness. If they're looking for exactly what's on Figueroa Street, they're not going to see this in my neighborhood, where I know there is a minor being sold right now, most likely within driving distance for me. So if the public misunderstands because of the way media tells the story, what kind of duty, ethical duty, is in that frame?
That's so important because I feel that by putting out this narrative over and over and over again and ignoring the proposals for different approaches or even instances where it's being practiced in a different way, that we are actually having an impact on policy and denying lots of people an opportunity to actually recover. We are contributing to this rescue idea, which is, because it's over and over again and we keep hearing that and we keep seeing the heroics and we keep seeing these scenes out of Hollywood, and that's the only narrative people are hearing, then what else is there? And so that becomes very easy for legislators to legislate in that direction, because that's what now the public is aware of and is outraged by, and give that vice unit more money and resources, versus, hey, there's that 5-year 128-point plan that isn't Hollywood, right? It's maybe a Lifetime series.
I'll sign up for that. So the answer for me going forward to the question, what else is there? I'm going to say, read Nina Alvarez. And you have a long list of credits to your name, and your journalism is telling a story that brings more context and is more survivor centered. And that builds hope for me. I'm going to give you one last comment because I just looked at the time, and I just want to know, what do you see coming in the future that will change this tendency to go, for want of a better term, Hollywood, just to get the likes and the attention?
Yeah, I think the intention behind this piece in the Columbia Journalism Review was really an effort to get a conversation going. How do we do this better so that we are actually telling the stories that need to be told, rather than putting out this same familiar narrative that is exciting, but it's not the whole story. And we have a responsibility to tell the whole story. And this was just a very small piece of it. And there are so many other factors that are contributors to why a girl or a boy or a trans youth are in these situations. And we are not addressing those, and we are not making those things a part of the story. So what I hope is that there will be more conversation in our newsrooms about how to do this ethically. And we do it. We do it. We've been talking about it in conflict photography, where we are photographing people in the worst moments of their lives. And how do we do this in a way that doesn't cause more harm or exploit a situation? And I think that's the conversation that we need to be having. And I hope this piece helps move us in that direction.
Nina, I am so grateful that you came on with me today, and I want to have another conversation, but we will post this on social media. And for listeners, please go to your social media, find this post, and join the conversation, because I agree with Nina that being a catalyst for more conversation will drive change. And I'm so grateful for your voice and your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandie.
Thank you to Nina Alvarez for inviting journalists, advocates, and listeners into a more intentional conversation about survivor stories. One practical question from this episode is worth carrying forward. Before we share a story, has the person truly been able to understand the risks and say no? Listeners, if you enjoyed this conversation, make sure you check out our website at endinghumantrafficking.org for tons of in-depth show notes and other resources. If you'd love to help us grow this podcast, you can start by sharing this episode with someone and connecting with us on Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn. And, as always, thank you for listening.